Hey, what is going on, Dr. Dave?
Dr.
Mr.
Joe,
Surprise.
how are you, man? How are you? It's been a long
I'm
time.
good, man. I'm good. Again, we're here again on Sunday doing our thing that we love to do. So glad you're doing well.
Yeah,
So I will
yeah.
go ahead and kick us off, and I
Alrighty.
want to welcome our listeners and viewers of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Again, where me and Dave get on here and just talk a bunch of stuff that sometimes you want to hear, maybe not all the time, but we're going to keep talking. We're
Don't
going to
want to,
keep
but need to.
saying it. Absolutely. We're going to keep being on this platform to continue to do that. So welcome. So if it's your first time, hope you enjoy the episode. And if you're returning, thanks for supporting us, and thanks for viewing and listening to this journey for both of us, not just you, but for both of us. So, with that, I've already had too much coffee this morning, so I'm kind of speedy on this. But yeah, just excited.
Oh,
Just
geez.
me and Dave get together. It's always exciting. So, I will go ahead and jump into our normal routine where I will go ahead and introduce our topic, and then Dave will run for 30 minutes and talk by himself. So, no, not at all. I will interject here and
Uh,
there. But our topic today is transferable skills,
mhm.
right? Transferable skills. What does that mean? And
Yeah.
with that, I'll let Dave go ahead and lead us into this discussion.
Well, Dr. Joe, thank you for that very humorous introduction. Our viewers are probably wondering what the heck is up
Yeah,
with
what
us
happened?
today. They're
Yeah.
like, what? These guys are, yeah, Joe was right. Too much coffee.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, transferable skills. We're going to approach this like we normally do. We're going to kind of provide our insights on what we believe or think or know certain things are. So in this case, transferable skills, and then we're going to discuss the personal and professional uses for those topics. So transferable skills, yeah, this is a great one. Transferable skills are those skills that we acquire over time throughout our life and our journeys, either educational or it could be through maybe taking just a short jaunt on the internet and learning something.
Hmm.
It could be a skill learned at work or in the military
Yep.
or as part of a hobby or general interest that we can use in more than one place. So it's an acquired skill that we can apply to more than one environment. So the thing that I really like about transferable skills is that if you learn a skill from an employer, you can use it in your personal life sometimes and vice
Yep.
versa. So it's usually you get a two for one out of it or two for many sometimes. So or a many for one, I guess. But yeah, that's how I look at it. I mean, it's pretty much anything that you can learn and pick up and maximize its use through many different applications. For example,
Yep.
communication. If you like myself, early in my adolescent years, I got involved into drama because I guess I enjoy drama, but not the negative drama. So I got into drama and I learned how to speak. Um, well, I knew how to speak beforehand, but just
I
speak
was going to
better, I
say,
should say.
okay, all right.
I was just oogling and ogling all the time. No. Um, yeah, so I learned how to present myself to an audience, and I used that in my military career in law enforcement to project my voice because that's one of the things that you learn how to do, which comes in very
Right,
handy.
right.
Um, and then I used that to further transfer into training. I got involved
Okay,
in
yeah.
training in the military and, again, projecting your voice, speaking clearly, enunciating so everyone understands, not mumbling or speaking in that ever enjoyable monotone. Yeah. And then on the personal side, well, then you and we met several years ago. We started talking and started this podcast, and that's personal slash professional.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, I mean that's my thoughts off the bat on it, as an example.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, Joe?
So Dave, that's very cool that you started out that way, because we also often think of those skills that are deliberate for some purpose or one
Mm.
thing. And, so like in my case, I was an airplane mechanic. And so, those transferable skills are not necessarily that I worked on airplanes, but it's knowing how to use tools, how to select tools and things like that. So I think a lot of times we get confused that if it's not the exact thing,
Yeah.
then it's not transferable. I mean, to your point, you just, explain communication and speaking and how it transferred into, your military experience, into teaching, into training. And that's the way. And it's funny because a lot of us don't view it that way. Again, if it doesn't have that exact title, then we oftentimes don't think that it's transferable or applicable to whatever we're
Mm.
doing. So that's why I think about, because, as a aircraft mechanic, I never took a car engine rebuilding class, but being familiar enough with aircraft maintenance, I actually took on that task without ever having done it before, and
Mm.
I was successful at it just because, again, those skills that you learn with hand tools and things like that was transferable to that other skill set. So
Mm.
that's why I think you did a very good job of explaining how we can transfer those skills, like you said, in your case, the communication all the way through probably your entire life. So again, learning how to
Yeah.
speak in front of groups and crowds and meetings, and how to project your voice differently. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I like the idea that you can continue to compile those transferable
Absolutely.
skills on top of one another.
Hmm.
Those skills that you learn, and so this often comes to mind for me is you become a jack of all trades but master of none, because you're using these specific skills. Now you've transferred them to something else that may not totally relate to what you're doing now, but the skills are transferable enough that'll get you started or get you going. And then at that point, you decide whether you want to become a master at that. But I just look at it as that way, that all that everything you learn, everything that you can apply forward is what I think about as far as transferable skills. Like,
I'm glad you brought up that quote because it's often misused frequently because it's only a portion, and if you take a portion of anything, it may not provide the complete picture. So,
right.
and I'm not reading online, but I'm gonna kind of go from memory. Um, the quote goes something like, "A jack of all trades and a master of none is sometimes better than a master of one."
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and I think that's further exemplifies the importance of having transferable skills and having
Right.
a broad knowledge base. Because yeah, you can be an expert at one thing, but if that's all you're good at, sometimes that's not a benefit. So to your point,
Right.
stacking these skills as we learn, I went into drama in middle school because I was very shy
Right.
and introverted, and we've talked about that before. So and then from there in the military, projecting my voice, going into training, but then okay, so that's training. So I trained in the military. What did that lead to? Well, that led me to being certified as a military instructor. And then from there, when I got out of the military, public speaking, and then creating training,
Right.
and then
Yep.
and then fast forward teaching college. So these skills can start out as a personal interest, even something we learn in our adolescence that's
Right.
carried forward.
Absolutely.
And the more we learn about it, to your point, the more it keeps stacking up and the more robust and in depth our experience becomes. So then we become, to your point, the jack of many trades.
Right.
So, and I like to tweak that quote to say, I'm a jack of many trades and master of some. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
really what we become as generalists, professional
Right.
generalists in our
Right.
field. And there, while there may be a need for being a material estimator, that's very narrow, but the field of estimating is very broad. So if you learn different types of estimating, you can then, let's say it is in the professional environment, let's flip the table a little bit. You can, if you learn how to estimate as a part of your job, you can then take that home with you and learn how to estimate for property or material items
Right. Right.
if you're wanting to make a purchase, because that's
Right.
essentially what you're doing. It's oversimplified, but you're pricing materials for the best quality and price. You can do that online at any of the online retailers. So it's
Absolutely.
interesting that you brought that up and approached it from that angle, because it's your transferable skills are absolutely stackable, and that's kind of a very cool thing, and in your example, you learned to work on military aircraft. Well, then that transferred over into, hey, well, what about a vehicle, a
Right. Right.
car? What
Absolutely.
about a
Yep.
motorcycle? What about a go-kart?
Yep.
What about this or that? Or maybe you're, who knows, Joe? Maybe you're in the backyard creating your own rocket. We don't know, but
Well, it's funny you mentioned go-kart because that actually I did do that for my kids when they were younger. I
of
took
course you
those transferable
did.
skills, and I had learned welding. My dad taught me welding when I was, 12 or 13 years old. So I learned how to just, very basically weld. But
Right.
then when I went to work for another job, I enhanced those skills by learning more. Someone else taught me a little more, a few more techniques. And then after that, that's years later, that's when I actually built a go-kart for my kids, just square tubing and put it together.
Wow.
So yeah, so again, it was those
So
transferable
when are we
skills.
building this rocket that you're talking about?
I'm gonna keep that hush for now. No, I'm not building a rocket, but to your point though, I was able to stack those different skills. So my knowledge of aircraft maintenance to basic welding to hand tools and all that, and converted that into, or transferred that into a skill where again, my end result was a go-kart,
Yep.
which to your point, um, those skills were stackable and I was able to use that. Even, like you say, some of the things you learn at work, how you can bring those back to your household. And even so for me, being an aircraft mechanic, again, I refer to that one. One of the things we learned very early on was to create shadow boards for our tools, just so when something was missing, you know exactly where it was. But
Mhm.
then also bringing that home and doing the same thing in my toolbox at home. Just again,
So it's funny that you brought that up, because I was just about ready to ask you, can you have more than one transferable skill? But I guess you just answered that question before I asked it. So let's
absolutely.
talk about having more than one transferable skill.
Well,
So,
again, it goes back to the stacking thing. I
mhm,
mean, because like our journeys, like you said, it's really just a combination of all the things we've learned,
mhm,
and then applying those when needed. And so transferable skills are just that. All the things we learn, we don't just learn it for that particular job or
mhm,
instant and then we put it aside and never use it again. In most
yeah.
cases, most of the things we've learned, we apply it in some form or fashion later down the road, that may not be, again, aligned with what you learned it, that
Mhm.
original reason for learning that skill or that trait. It now applies in another form or fashion. Again, I'll go back to, being an aircraft mechanic and learning the importance of, scheduling maintenance and things like that.
Mhm.
So the aircraft industry, there are very strict timelines on when you do certain things.
So
So
what I'm hearing is that when you have a skill set and you continue to build that skill set or add to it or stack it, it becomes an evolving, a living
oh,
thing. That skill
absolutely,
becomes a living part of you that's
absolutely,
constantly growing and evolving
and changing
and
as
changing and
required.
being mastered and
Absolutely.
relearned.
Absolutely. So that's where I was going. So again, learning these skills, the importance of schedule maintenance on aircraft, it was easy for me to transfer that to a manufacturing organization that I worked
Mm,
for that basically ran by the seat of their pants because they would run all their equipment to failure,
mm,
right?
mm.
And couldn't gather the concept, well, let's schedule maintenance ahead of time so
Right.
that we can possibly prevent some of those things. And
Yeah.
so that's what I did. I
And
brought that
that's always an
knowledge and
interesting
experience.
argument in a production based environment, whether you run something to the point of failure or maintain it. What is more cost effective? And then that in itself, as you mentioned, is a skill set, because
Absolutely.
if we apply that to our personal environment, do we maintain that vehicle? Do we provide an oil change and
Right.
maintenance, rotate the tires, or do we just run it into the ground because it's just a junker that
Right.
just
Right.
getting us back and forth to work anyways, and there's no sense putting any more into it aside from just barely keeping it going.
So to that point, my car that I drive today has over 200,000 miles. And why? Because I maintained it. I did the
Mhm.
schedule, uh, required maintenance on it, the oil changes, tire rotations, and things like that. And took it to my mechanic a few months ago, and they were like, "Wow, this still looks really good."
Mhm.
And that's what it comes down to. Do you want to just drive it until the wheels fall off, or do you want to hold on to it for a lot longer? And again, that's one of those transferable skills that I learned. Aircraft maintenance, you maintain a schedule, and your equipment will last a lot longer. So
Yeah.
that's
I'd,
just one example.
yeah, I'd like to pull out another example, and I saw this. This is from I read this online several to many years ago, and is about a person that was either had not been in the professional work environment or was returning to the professional working environment after many years at being the at-home provider,
Right.
and that person was concerned with, and I'm going to use air quotes, not having any real professional experience because it had been so long since they'd been in
Right.
the
Right.
professional environment, and they weren't sure if they were going to be able to find work because 10 years out of work can potentially raise a lot of questions, as to what do you really bring if you haven't been going to college that entire 10 years. And in
Right.
this particular scenario, that was the case. They were just at home taking care of the family, and that was their job. And what they did was they capitalized on their budgeting and finance and
Yep.
accounting
Yep.
experience from running a household,
Right.
and demonstrated how that could be applied to the business environment. And that person wound up getting a job in the finance department. So
So
go ahead.
I was just gonna kind of touch on what you just mentioned about able to show that that's one of the challenges that we all face. Again, having all these skills in us, how do we make it to where it
Visible.
make it to visible to make sense to people so that they do take that
Mhm.
now I can't even think of the word, but they it eliminates or minimizes their concern for your
Yeah.
abilities because you've shown them how it's going to positively impact them. And going back to the scenario where I talked about being able to transfer my aircraft knowledge of scheduling to that organization, that was the first thing I had to do was to prove that it's worth it.
Mhm.
The money saved, the time saved, all those things. That's the challenge sometimes that we have, to being able to show our work, basically
Mhm.
show
Mhm.
that we may not have the certificate in that skill or may not have the credentials that show that we have the what it takes, but we still have the ability to do it. And that's the challenge that sometimes we have to overcome,
Yeah.
showing our work, showing that we're capable and build
Absolutely.
our ability to
Absolutely.
do it.
And just because you learn something as a part of your daily life or as part of a hobby or it's just part of something you do to give back or pay it forward does not mean that it's doesn't have a use. I would
Absolutely.
actually,
Yep.
we would both, and I'm going to speak for Joe on this one, we would actually argue that that is not the case. Double negative, grammar not good. But yeah, so you can learn skills that are quote unquote, or again air quotes, not professionally
Right.
learned,
Right.
that can be applied there. And one of the things that directly pertains to would be like volunteer work, whether
Right.
it's
Yep.
with a community, whether it's for a church or religious entity, whether it's volunteering at homeless shelters or giving back, whatever. I mean, these are all things that if you do them regularly and consistently, you can add them to your resume or your repertoire of skills that you bring and offer
Right.
to a
Right.
company. One of the questions I get asked frequently by by some folks is, well, what about my volunteer work? Well, add it to your resume
Right.
because
Yep.
you've done it. If you've helped, a dozen people every year for the last 20 years with their taxes, add that onto your resume
Right.
because that
Right.
means you have some, maybe not, maybe you're not like the top expert in tax completing taxes, but you've got enough experience to capture that. I mean, that's a good thing. It doesn't have to be 20 years, but I mean,
Right.
if you're doing this on a consistent basis, weekly or monthly or quarterly, that's a big bonus.
Absolutely. And to that point, and I know, and we may have touched on this in a previous episode, but as we do our critical self reflection and things like that, and we're trying to figure out what's next for us. This is one of the things that I'm just recently done myself, is really capture everything that you've done, like you say, whether it's volunteer or professional, at home. Write down all those things that you've done, that
Yeah.
again, the voluntary, where you were on a board, where
Mhm.
you had to select the new choir. I mean, any type of skill that you add, write it down, and
Mhm.
you'd be amazed at how some of those things overlap or are very
Oh,
similar,
absolutely.
or the long list of things that you've done, and then start thinking of how's that transferable to a job or a
Mhm.
new career. I mean, even if you have to go online and start searching keywords and things like that to see how those align, and then in preparation for maybe a new career, a new job, that you start to
Or entrepreneurship.
right.
And
But just to start to correlate those things
mhm.
by saying, hey, how does that relate to whatever I'm going to do next? And
Mhm.
start to really think about that. Because the more you think about it and prepare, for job interviews and things like that, the more you think about it, the more prepared you are.
Yeah.
And so that's why like I said, I think it's a good exercise for you to just take stock of what you've done, write all those
Yeah.
things down as much as you can remember, and then start to again look at how does it transfer into what I
Mhm.
want to do next or what I plan to do in the future. And
Yeah.
I think that'll help people with understanding how transferable your skills are and how much you stacked
Mhm.
some of those transferable skills on top of one another and how they relate.
Mhm. And when we talk transferable skills, I think it's important to clarify that this includes not just, and I'm going to use the publicly used phrasing, hard and soft skills, and the
Right,
academic phrasing, interpersonal and technical skills. So
right,
your hard skills are technical skills, your soft skills are interpersonal skills. It includes both of those. To your point, you were speaking of a technical skill, the mechanical side of things. I was talking
right,
about the interpersonal, the communication side of things. And sometimes skills can overlap and be both interpersonal and technical, or
right.
hard and soft skills, depending on their application. So, I mean, it's really, the list can be limitless, virtually limitless. I
Absolutely.
mean, my wife and I, we watch cooking shows, and I love to watch shows that are like that because you can learn a little bit about people. And here, in this particular example, here are people that may have worked professionally in the cooking, in the cooking realm, and some people that may have just had a very strong passion for it on the personal side, but they take that professional into the personal side, or that personal into the professional side, and they use that to start their own business, or to
Right,
get into
right.
the business of cooking, become a sous
Yep.
chef or a chef or a line cook, and eventually have their own restaurant. And I think that is such an inspiration, because most everyone I talk to eats food. So it's a great example to use. We talk about food. I mean, now I know how to boil water and burn toast
Right,
really well. So I probably would not be successful in pursuing that. However, there are
right,
some people that have that innate ability to help others. And some of the people might be, cooking for the community because of maybe a natural disaster, or maybe they cook for their church or cook for their schools, that their kids are going to, or that other, someone else's children are going to. And then they just decide to go to the next level, whether it's a cooking
right.
competition or starting their own catering business. And that's really, and I think that's a good example of really what we're trying to drive home. You don't have to be a brain surgeon, a
Right,
neurosurgeon.
right, right,
And I probably encourage you not to do neurosurgery in your garage. That's not
right,
not usually recommended by most states.
right.
So, understand what skills are transferable. So, yeah.
No, I like that approach, Dave, that you talk about, because that's why I mentioned the taking stock of what you have to offer,
Absolutely.
and really seeing how they align to the next thing. And you brought it up early on when you talked about us doing this podcast. That's the same thing. I mean, we both have taught, we both have been in front of people, we both have
Hmm.
been on, you done videos. So taking those, in some cases they're very minimal skills, but what we've now amplified them, or maximized our efforts with this
Hmm.
podcast, by doing that, by capitalizing on some of those transferable skills.
Hmm.
And that's what we're doing today. But like you said, with the coach, with the cooking,
Hmm.
someone that's served on a food line, or done some other things like that, how transferable is that to them to start their own restaurant, or
Hmm.
food truck, or whatever it is. But like Dave said, that's what we're trying to get through, is the fact that it doesn't have to, you don't have to have a certificate for it, you don't have to have a long experience level in that, say you've been doing it for 10 years. No, that's not the case. It's
Yeah.
still, you got to get to that next level, you are going to have to do some things, but you may already have some of the fundamentals or groundwork,
Hmm.
so that you don't have to start from the very beginning. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the challenges that most of us face when we go into a new environment, say a new working environment, and we don't really think about those things that we do have experience with. And more importantly, it's those people on the other end that we're trying to convince that
Hmm.
we have that experience and knowledge. And again, I said that earlier, that's the challenge that we have, is trying to show them that we do have an idea of what that
Hmm.
means. And maybe our resume doesn't specifically say that title or that task, but we've done it. And so
Hmm.
that's why, again, we'll recommend that you go back, make a list of those things that you're confident with, that you believe you can do them, at a good level, high level, and then present those as things that you want to pursue, or that you feel that you're confident enough to do, if you're pursuing a new job or new career.
Yeah.
So that's why I brought up the piece about taking stock.
Yeah.
Just look at what you've accomplished, and even in me and Dave sat down, took a day or two, and just wrote down everything that we have done multiple times, that we're confident enough to say we can do. It'd probably be a long list of items
It would
that
be like a
we've done.
dictionary, pretty much.
Yeah, and not to say, like you said, not to say that we're a master of all of those, but some of those we
Yeah.
are. But then we have knowledge of a lot of different things.
Yeah. As
So
we close,
Dave,
yeah, yeah. As we
yeah,
close
I was
out,
just gonna say, you're trying to steal my thunder by taking, my lead on this. So I'm gonna go ahead and offer you that opportunity
thank
to,
you. I appreciate
give
that.
your final thoughts.
Yeah, I want to provide one more very concise example, and actually, it's going to be kind of like it's two examples. So think about athletics or sports, and think about the military. One's potentially personal, and one's potentially well, the other is professional.
Right,
But when we look at teamwork as a transferable skill, that could just be from playing sports and having a passion for
right,
sports,
yep,
just like being in the military. Sometimes there's the discussion of, well, that was military, that doesn't count in the civilian side of things, but some skills are absolutely transferable. Teamwork in the military, teamwork in athletics and sports.
right, yep,
Teamwork is teamwork. If you know how to be part of a team, you know how to be part of a team. It doesn't matter the industry. These transferable skills transcend the industries. They are about the skill set itself, not the environment. So with that, I'm gonna toss the baton. Well, I'm gonna hand the baton. I don't believe in throwing
All right.
objects at
Yeah,
other
don't throw.
people.
You might break your screen or your camera. So, but that's a very good point. I had that same conversation with my son just a couple of weeks ago, and that was it. That he played sports, most of his life, and those skills that he learned, playing the sports, are transferable to corporate America and to
Mm-hmm.
his new job. And
Yep.
and so, to your point, that's exactly true. It transcends all industries. The idea that you've worked with a team, that you had a leader, that you had people to fill specific roles, is transferable to that corporate environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yeah, I think we'll end it there. Me and Dave have been kind of gibbering for about half an hour. But we do want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Like we've said, we enjoy doing this. Today, for whatever reason, we were just so excited and giddy. So hopefully it translated and you still got the content that we're trying to provide for you. And again, if this is your first time, thanks for tuning in. And if you've been a long time viewer or listener, thank you for your continued support. Again, reach out to us if you want to hear something different. Share this with someone else. Like it. Again, we want to continue to do this, so we want to make sure we're providing you with the content you want to hear and see. So with that, we just want to continue being your not so ordinary you.